I'm in teacher education. I prepare future high school teachers, and previously, I was a high school teacher myself for about a decade. So as I talk about school in this presentation, my default is always high school. I want to ask you to engage with me in a little interactive activity. So it's going to involve standing on your feet and some visualization. So if you would humor me, everyone go ahead and take your feet. I want you to close your eyes and do some visualizing right now. I want you to think about high school. Imagine yourself in class. Could be any class, maybe your favorite class, maybe your least favorite class, it doesn't matter. You in class setting. How many of you ever asked the question, how many points is this worth? Go ahead and take your seats. All right, those of you still standing? How many of you ever went into an exam or a test and calculated the number of points that you needed in order to keep the grade that you wanted? Go ahead and take your seats. I can't tell if anyone else is still standing. It doesn't look like it from here. If you're still standing, I'd like to talk with you afterwards. That's fantastic. Go ahead and take your seats. Because the third question is a little more personal. Sometimes you may have fallen behind in high school, and it's quite possible that you were either mathematically eliminated from getting an A, or getting a B, or getting a C, or possibly even mathematically eliminated from even passing the class. And that's a very real situation. I think that the activity that we just went through shows us how throughout school, especially secondary school, we've been trained to accumulate points, sometimes by any means necessary. I would oftentimes at the beginning of a semester sort of informally poll my students. How many of you want to get an A in this class? How many of you want to get a B? A C? All right, how many of you are just looking to pass the class? And I feel like my students were really honest with me in those moments. And then sometimes I would follow it up and I would say, if I could just give you that grade right now, and we could bypass all the learning that we're about to do in this course, how many of you would take it? And I feel like they were honest with me when they answered those questions as well, which was disappointing to me. I feel like points and percentage-based grading is shifting the value of our classrooms away from learning towards earning points. And I see this as problematic. Like I said, I teach future teachers. They're an inspiring bunch. Oftentimes, I ask them, why do you want to be a teacher? And they give me a range of answers, but the most common can kind of be summed up into these three. One is that they want to make a difference in students' lives, especially my secondary teacher candidates. They want to make a difference in students' lives in high school, adolescence, that period of self-discovery, self-identity realization. The other common answer I'll get is that they have a passion for their content area. And I see teacher candidates from every single discipline, science, business, English, history, math, all of them. And they love their content. They're passionate about it, and they want to pass that on to future generations. Others will also talk to me about inspiring a lifelong love of learning, just a curiosity to learn as much as they can that can never be quenched. It's inspiring. But here's one thing that they never, ever say. They never say they want to be a grader. They never talk about how they're excited to grade piles of essays that will be accumulating on their desk. They don't talk about having to grade exams and quizzes every single night, or every single weekend, every single week, every single semester, every single year. They never talk about how they loved getting grades when they were in school, and they can't wait to give out grades themselves. A's, B's, C's, they love that. They never mention that. Some of my graduate students, most of whom are current teachers, I'll pose this question. Are you a teacher or are you a grader? And they often struggle to answer that. I feel like there's this inconsistency in the point of our classes. For students, it's about getting a grade. For teachers, it's about teaching the content and making sure that our students learn. And I could get into all the negative aspects of traditional grades, that they're demotivating to students, Alfie Kohn's research, or that grades mask our true abilities. If you have an 86%, we think that we know what that means, that we can make a judgment about that student's ability, but it really doesn't tell us if they're better at grammar or creative writing. I can talk about the negative aspects or the dangers of grades as a competition. And certainly there's elements where competition is good and healthy. But when it comes to learning, in competitions, there's always winners and losers. And when it comes to learning, who are the winners and who are the losers of learning? I could talk about dangers of grades as currency, and there are studies that have shown teachers feel like points are the currency of our classrooms. And they feel okay with that in a lot of cases. But then at that point, grades could go to the highest bidder. And I feel like there's court cases currently going on right now that are a testament to that. So I'm not going to talk about any of those things. I'm going to talk about my own experience as a high school teacher. It was spring 2005, and I was getting to that point in my career where I was a veteran. Summer is on the rise. Students are excited. There was just this energy buzzing around the classroom. And I rolled out the very last project that we had for the year, and I completely deflated all of the energy in the classroom. It was a total buzzkill. And I had one brave student raise his hand in the front and ask, "How many points is this worth?" And this was a question that I had heard before. As a teacher, you encounter this question from time to time. But for some reason, in that moment, it sounded different to me. It was like a watershed moment in my career. Because I looked into this student's eyes, and I could see him mentally calculating in his mind. And I knew he wasn't really asking, how many points is this worth? What he wanted to know is, do I even have to do this at all? Or can I just completely mail this one in, and my grade is going to be fine? And I thought to myself, well, what's the point? Why am I giving my students these assignments? Why am I creating these projects for my students only to have them weigh whether or not it's worth it to them to do it? So the semester ended, and that summer I spent my entire summer revamping my grading system. With one of my colleagues, soon to be Dr. Lance Huffman. He was in this journey with me, and we came up with this, what we had no other name for but to call the no points grading system, where we tried to evaluate students' work qualitatively and place them into different categories with different tiers that students could earn in order to get their letter grades. But we removed all points and all percentages. And so I'm here to tell you that the following is possible if you remove all points and percentages from your grading. You're still able to maintain rigor. You can focus on students' quality of work. It can remove grade-related anxiety, where you can focus instead on students' learning. It encourages creative thinking. You can teach your students to make their work unique. And it removes these extrinsic motivators to foster some intrinsic motivation. And I want to give you some examples of each one of these. I would often have high schoolers return to me when I was in the classroom. And they would say things to me like, "College is easy compared to your class. I just turn everything in I did for you and I get A's." And I don't necessarily condone that, but I thought it was interesting to note. Students are very anxious. They're stressed out about a lot of things, grades being one of them. And by removing points and percentages, it allows them to just focus instead on the content of learning. This quote came from one of my student evals here in higher education, talking about that very thing. This next one, though, was an email that I received from a former student, teacher candidate, who went through my no points grading class, and he was never rude or disrespectful. He was a great student, but he sat in the back and did a lot of eye rolling, and I could tell he never really bought into the no points grading system. So I was surprised a semester later to receive this email from him, where he said, "Thank you for opening my mind to a new way to assess students with the no-points grading scale. I've gone through my student teaching and I'm realizing how many students just want to cram for tests and spit out information that they know instead of applying it and finding a way to be creative. I could not have been more prepared for this position if it was not for your class and for the rest of the School of Teaching and Learning. Thank you very much for everything and for pushing me to limits that I did not know I had." I think that that's what's especially encouraging about taking on an endeavor like removing points and percentages from your grading system, is that even though it may put students outside of their comfort zone, once they're there in that space, the possibilities are limitless. They can really flourish and thrive in those spaces. By removing extrinsic motivators, it fosters a sense of intrinsic motivation. Here's another comment from one of my course evals. As teacher candidates, we're regularly encouraged to think outside the box, but this is the first time I've actually been required to put those convictions into practice. Now, certainly detractors will say, well, there's still extrinsic motivation. There's still a grade at the end. And that's true. Even though we can't completely remove that, by removing the points and the percentages, that's what's commonly understood. It gives them that drive to focus their energies elsewhere. Certainly, there's some real challenges to this, right? The first of which is tradition. For most of us sitting in this room, this is the way that we've always been graded, with points and percentages. And so we feel like we know what that means. Lots of things in our society are given grades outside of the classroom. Airlines, restaurants, businesses, A's, B's, C's, even NFL drafts, right, are given a letter grade because we have a cultural understanding of what that means. So anytime that we're going to move away from that, any change is different. I also think that there's been a lot of misunderstanding and misinformation communicated about the purpose of certain grading reforms that are on the rise, most notably standards-based grading, which is a response to the current culture of Common Core standards. A lot of times I'll hear parents concerned that if we remove points and percentages, if we remove traditional grades, it will negatively impact their chances to gain admission into colleges. But that's changing too. The New England Secondary Schools Consortium received 81 colleges that support proficiency-based report cards. Among them, MIT, Harvard. Some of the most prestigious colleges have signed on to state that they will endorse proficiency-based report cards and student learning at any level. Another challenge is consistency in grading. But I'm here to report that consistency in grading is a challenge regardless of the type of grading that you're doing. It could be that an A in your physical education class, no offense, PE, is not the same as an A in calculus. And we all know teachers that are hard graders, right? And those have typically come to us from traditional points-based grading situations. Grading is an inherently subjective activity, regardless of the style that you're using. If it's traditional points grading, or if it's proficiency grading, or minimum grading, removal of all zeros, grading is inherently subjective. Even though these challenges are real, hope is also real. Grading reform is becoming more and more prominent. Hundreds of schools across the nation are taking on some sort of grading reform. Some experts estimate it's up to 50% of schools are either changing their grading or at least considering reforming some of their grading practices. Teachers are collaborating across social media networks like never before. There are healthy, thriving groups of teachers who are encouraging each other towards healthy assessment and grading practices. A couple of note are Teachers Going Gradeless. You can find them on Twitter, #TG2. Or TTOG, Teachers Throwing Out Grades, on Facebook and Twitter, I think. Finally, I can attest that we have waves of passionate teacher candidates flooding into the profession right now. And they're looking to make a difference in students' lives. They're looking to pass on their love for learning, and they're looking to inspire lifelong love of learning from their students. And I, for one, am excited to see the culture that they create. Thank you very much.